A few weeks ago in my newsletter, I wrote about my friend David's story. I outlined his 30-year journey to financial independence where he navigated challenges like career uncertainty, even a cancer diagnosis. The response was bigger than I expected, so I called David and asked if he'd be willing to come on and share his story. David also has a YouTube channel called David in Progress where he talks about three things: financial independence, retiring early, and living your best life now. Here's my conversation with David. David, thanks for coming on. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so take us back to when you were 28 years old, newly married, new house, had a young son. What did that look like, and what were you thinking about the future at that time before your diagnosis?
Oh, well, yeah. So I guess it was about a year and a half into our marriage, and in the house that we're living now. And I was working a fairly new job at Sprint at that time. I'd been there, gosh, probably less than 2 years, and I started as a retail manager and was doing something different. So really, it's one of those, that stage in life for most people, you're just kind of getting going in your career. And I felt like I was on a pretty good path, especially compared to how I thought life was going to be turning out for me. I was pretty excited.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's like you're just starting out and you're getting established, and you have your house and family and married and you have a kid now, and so then you are in the shower, you found a lump, and walk us through what that felt like and what those next couple months after that were like. After that,
Yeah,
essentially
it's
diagnosis. At that point, you knew what was going on.
yeah. Just a little quick background on that. I'd had a mole removed off of my back several years earlier, and my mother actually passed away from cancer just a few weeks before our wedding. But before I asked my wife to marry me, I went to an oncologist and about my mole and all that stuff, and asked him about the chances of a reoccurrence. And he said, "No, don't worry about it, David. Go live your life and be happy." And I wanted that validation before I even asked my wife to marry me, given that my mother had passed away before our marriage. And my father actually died when I was very young. I was 5 or 6. I have no memories of him. So I was really worried about getting married and something happening to me, and then my son growing up with the same kind of situation I had, all that kind of stuff. So then fast
Yeah,
forward to that moment, I'm I get up normal day, I'm taking a shower, and I feel the lump underneath my arm, and just something in my head and my heart, I guess, immediately knew what it had to be. I didn't tell my wife about it. I got dressed as if I was going to work, but instead of going to work, I left the house and called that same oncologist that I'd visited 5 years earlier, and or a couple years earlier, and set up an appointment for that afternoon. And then I go in to him, and he immediately he touches underneath my arm and feels it, and he says, "What about the lumps on your neck? How long have you had those?" And I had no idea I had some lumps on my neck, and that's kind of how that day went. There was a brief time where between the doctor's appointment and after I talked to my wife, I stopped by the church and went into a chapel and spent some time there because I just knew what was going to be coming next. And then I went to that doctor's appointment. Same doctor I had seen a couple years earlier became my doctor for more than 20 years after that.
yeah. Wow. So this was like 30 years ago now. So clearly you had the treatment. It was successful, which isn't always the case. And some people who go through this successful cancer treatment come out the other side and they're kind of like relieved. They're like, okay, like breath of fresh air. But you came out with more of a sense of urgency about your financial future. Can you explain, like, what brought that on and what you were thinking about then?
Well, the cancer experience, anyone who's been through that, it's much like any other kind of trauma. When I first felt those lumps and everything, you go into a lot of research on what the percentage opportunities are, how long you're going to live and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, 5 year survival rate and those
And the,
things.
the tumors were rather large, and I went down to MD Anderson and got a consultation and did exactly what they had suggested when I got back. And I went through the chemotherapy, and the lumps shrunk rather quickly, which was great. The doctor initially didn't say that would happen. He said that was a little miracle. And then I went in and did the surgery and took out all the lymph nodes on this side of my body. And I'll never get that moment. I'm with that doctor. It's a different doctor. And I can see him in my mind's eye now that I'm thinking about it, just as if it was yesterday. He's got his white coat on. He's sitting there with a clipboard, but he's off in the far corner and wouldn't even make eye contact with me. And he's like, David, I'm really sorry to tell you that it's very clear the kind of cancer you have, that it's in basically all your lymph nodes. So all but a couple of them tested positive, which made me stage 4 at that time. And if you know anything about cancer, stage 4 is not a good diagnosis.
It's not ideal. Yeah.
No, but I went through some other stuff and I came out of that fine. In fact, the doctor, Dr. Canal was his name. He's retired now, but they used to keep a picture of me in the treatment room. It wasn't just me; it was a bunch of other people, and it said "Miracle Man" underneath it. He called me that, and he was great because when I would ask him about the statistics and everything, he would say, "I don't talk about that with my patients. If you really want it, I'll have somebody else tell you that stuff, but we're going to put it in God's hands and just hope for the best." And that's exactly what happened. And if I think about uh, how that impacts like career of everything, one thing about trauma or especially something like this, cancer might leave your body, but I always say cancer really doesn't leave you. It's always on your shoulder, kind of whispering, I'm going to be
Mm.
back. uh, you can do whatever, but I am still here. When you get that little headache or maybe a random pain, unfortunately, sometimes the first thing that comes back is remembering what you went through. What happens when you go through chemotherapy and all that kind of stuff. So I always had that little voice kind of whispering in my ear saying, I'll be back. And I may come and get you, and then you're going to die, and you're going to leave your wife alone, and you're going to leave your son alone, and he's going to grow up like you did. And that was definitely fueled to try and make sure that if something were to happen, if it was to come back, that I would leave them financially okay. I might go away, but I didn't. My greatest fear was that besides this actually death, wouldn't say I really worry about that all that much, was what you leave behind is the main thing, and leaving the family behind, but also financially devastated because I was no longer there. I worked in a very high layoff environment most of my career.
Right.
And so almost every year after the company grew a little bit, I worked at Sprint. There were layoffs all the time. In fact, there were several years where we had it twice in one year. And I, of
Yeah.
course,
And
saw all the reaction of everybody around me. And there's a chance that any day you walk in could be your last day. At the same time, fear kept me there in a way because I guess I could have moved on and gone to work for another company, but I was doing well at that company. I was a high performer, consistently rated high performer, all that kind of stuff, and growing in my career. And maybe I just afraid of change. I just stuck it out despite all that other stuff was going on. So it was really two things. It was the cancer thing, then it was also the yearly layoff thing.
yeah, and you and I have kind of talked about this offline too, about how you've taken the tortoise approach and invest long term in your 401k or your, IRAs and stuff like that. So you were kind of in that unconventional thought early on that you're going to, build this nest egg and not have to and be able to retire early. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I got lucky
that's
that I kind of understood compounding at a young working age. I read that book, The Millionaire Next Door, back when I was still making $14,000 a year with my $3,000 bonus. And then I would, back then he didn't have AI and the calculators like everything now, but I would sit down and figure compounding. I even would manually write it out. If I save this much this year, how much is that going to be worth 10, 15, 20 years from now? And it would just blow my mind. And then eventually when Fidelity has this retirement savings tool that does, those Monte Carlos things. And I was
right.
amazed at how little I had now, but at an average market, if I saved this same amount, how much Fidelity was saying I would have by the time I turned 65 or whatever. It just blows your mind when you have a
Yeah,
small amount, but see what it could be 20 years from now. And those calculators are just amazing.
it's the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest. So,
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, so then you're building your financial security. You've got this plan, and then right when you're building that financial security, your wife loses her job after 9/11. And most people see this as a setback, but you saw it as like more pressure to earn more and, try to like put more on your shoulders. So where does that like instinct come from to like take that sense of urgency and then just like, go directly at it?
Well, first of all, I'm totally not a type A kind of person. That's not my style or whatever. And I think I need a little bit of a hand behind me, pushing me forward, because I'm not the kind of person who's always going forward on their own without just maybe some type of incentive. And when 9/11 came, her company she worked for ended up just actually closing. They lost so many customers. And at that time, I think her son was 5 or so. And we talked about it and decided for her just to find something that was part time instead. Meanwhile, I'd gone back to school to get my master's degree. I have a master's in adult education and training because I was seeking to get a different job, to move up as a manager. And I had applied for it a couple of times and didn't get the job. And I got feedback that, well, for one thing, you don't have a degree or anything that relates totally to this. I went, oh, okay. So I just went back to school. And it's amazing how much better you can be at school when you go back as an adult. I wasn't a very good
Right.
student growing up or in college. I didn't know what I wanted. But the cool thing was I was learning in the evening the exact same thing that I was doing during the day, and that was really great. So the next time that job came open, I got the job, and the feedback I got from the hiring manager was he had given the same advice to multiple people, and I was the only one who took the advice and did something with it. And it wasn't that I had gotten a degree or whatever, is that I had taken the feedback and actually had done something with the feedback. That was a big work lesson for me.
Right. Yeah. You had the initiative and you listened to him.
Right. And I loved the school experience, so that worked out great as well. And that he honestly told me that was the only reason I was chosen over the other candidate was we both had been turned down the first time. We both got the same advice, and I was the only one that had done something with it. Meanwhile, my wife's now working part time, and I was just seeing the great value that was bringing to our family. My son being able to spend time with her and everything she was getting to do with not only take care of him, but the part-time person was able to also drive everyone else's kids around and take them to the soccer games and stuff. And that was so great. And that really motivated me to do work, to be really good at work, so that they could have that life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And so we're going to fast forward a little bit here. After decades of this disciplined saving, investing, and now you're 56. Well, you were 55 when you can kind of talk about that, use the rule of 55. But the year you turned 56, I think it was, you retire early. And what did that moment actually feel like? Because there's those of us who haven't gotten there yet, and we're just thinking, man, it's going to be so much different when I actually get that retirement age and I'm actually on my, in retirement, in early retirement. So what's that actually feel like in reality?
Well, I kind of have a crazy story that goes with it. I probably have told you, but when I got through that 5 year cancer mark, and I'm listening to Dave Ramsey at this time, and that was probably my primary get out of debt, inspiration was him. And I remember it's actually in the other room, but one day for whatever reason, I wrote 2024 on a post-it note, and I stuck it up on my cubicle. And so this was more than 20 years ago. And I didn't know the term financial independence or work optional, all the stuff we talk about now, but my goal was that by 2024 that we would have enough in savings that if I wanted to, I could just walk out of work and be done. So that was 20 something years ago. And specifically, my goal date was May of 2024. May is the month where I felt the lump. I call it May 28th lump day. So I wanted to have that financial independence by May 24th of 2024. And sure enough, I get laid off in December of 2023. And my severance, I realized one day, is ending on the same week I had written on that post-it note more than 20 years earlier and stuck up on my cubicle.
Wow, that's
And
crazy.
I had spent hours staring at that cubicle. I'd get off a stressful call, or in my management role, I'd fire an employee, whatever was going on, and I'd spend just a few minutes staring at that post-it note, maybe pull up the Monte Carlo thing and see that everything said by that date I was going to be okay. And I'd take a deep breath and go, hey, it doesn't matter what's going on around me. Everything is leading towards that post-it note. And so I get laid off along with everybody else. And it just so happened I pivoted to a different career. My last 3 years, I was in HR. So I was helping lay off a lot of people. Once we finished laying off everyone, they laid us off. Anyhow, so I'm walking out that door in December with that severance all the way till May. And I had a big smile on my face. As a matter of fact, most people, when they got laid off, immediately had to leave. They cut all your stuff off and kick you out. Well, they asked me to stick around for a couple of months so I could continue to help people that were being laid off. And I didn't mind because I had my post-it note, I'm getting my severance, and I was happy to stick around. So I stuck around through all that time. Yeah, it's sad though. I was there 27 years. I was one of the first employees hired in my area. I was the only one still left from that very first group. And it is kind of, you lose a little bit of closure versus I left on my own and retired and you're leaving high, head held high. I, I still remember getting that box and putting the last of my stuff in. And I did have an office, and I wrote on the whiteboard, David was here, and I put the date of my exit and left. And I walked out alone, and I asked an employee to come and take a picture of me walking out. And I have some blurry pictures of myself carrying that box outside of the office. So from that respect, it felt great. I mean, we hit the ground running. That was in December. Right away, we went to 3 national parks that month. We booked a trip to Miami to go to all the national parks in Florida. We did that early, I think, January and February. And then we also did all the Utah parks, or 3 of the Utah parks, later on in May. So that true go-go when you're super excited, and that honeymoon stage right after you retire, it was great. I mean, what God's providence to me, I was like, I stick this note and I'm thinking about it and praying about it, whatever, and everything works out exactly as I'd planned.
Yeah, yeah, it was almost like you couldn't write a story that way. So 6 months after you've done a couple trips, and then you get this this cardiac diagnosis of heart failure, and you were telling me that you were in the office where they were doing the testing, and they didn't think that you seemed concerned enough, like
Yeah,
because you
this whole
felt
thing was
okay.
such a surprise because in a couple of years prior to all this, anticipating that I'd probably get laid off, I had gone to the doctor and said, "Hey, treat me like a used car. I think I'm going to get laid off. I want you to do every test possible. Just check me out, and because if there's something broken, I want to get it fixed now before I leave the garage, so to speak." And so I'd had a lot of testing done. I even had a PET scan done, all these things. And for whatever reason, the heart issue didn't show up on all these tests because they were looking to see if I might have had cancer anywhere.
Mm,
And I did look back at the PET scan, and it did mention I had an enlarged heart, but they were looking for other things is what I equate for it. So I go in May, my usual checkup. I'm really good about going to the doctor every year. And my regular doctor says, "Hey, your heart doesn't sound right. I'm going to put you on an EKG." And he did that. And he said, "I'm going to send you to a stress test." I go, "Okay." And so I meet a cardiologist and do the stress test, and I'm running on the treadmill. They got me at some speed, and the tech comes by and says, "Are you feeling okay?" I go, "Yeah, I'm feeling just fine." And she said, "Okay." And she left for a minute or two, and then she came back and asked me the same questions. Are you feeling okay? Are you short of breath? Are you doing all right? I said, "No, I'm doing fine. I'm a runner. I've been a runner most of my life, and I was kind of enjoying doing this treadmill thing." And she says, "Well, David, we're going to stop the test right now. Uh, you are having an incident right now. I've spoken to your cardiologist. He's down the hall in his office, and you need to go there immediately." So I'm like, "Oh, oh crap!" So I go over there. Uh, I journal while I'm sitting in the lobby, so I can still look at my notes and see exactly what I was thinking. And I go in to see him, and he's much better than that white coat doctor with the clipboard that I met those many years earlier. High
yeah, the
empathy. He's sitting,
oncologist.
yes, he's sitting very close to me, and he's telling me, "David, it looks like you have severe blockage. This is life-threatening." I remember that very clearly. And then he says, "Life-threatening" again. And then the third time he says life-threatening, I say, "Dr. So-and-so, well, I need to stop you for a second. I'm getting the feeling that you don't think I understand what you are saying." And he said, "Well, yes, actually, I do. You are not reacting as I would expect someone to react with this news that I'm giving you." And I told him, I said, "Did you look back at my record and see that I've gone through the cancer experience?" And he said, "Oh, yes." And I said, "Well, that's why it's not that I don't understand what you were telling me. I totally get it. Uh, I realized from that experience that going into a pit of despair right now is not going to help me at all. I just need to understand the plan and what we're going to do to fix it." And then after that, he was better about it with me, and he smiled and laughed a little bit, and he said, "Okay, let's start talking about the plan and let's move on."
Yeah. And also, didn't just previous to this, like a week or so before, you and your wife were on a trip to national parks and you were doing hiking and all those kind of things. So you wouldn't have thought that you didn't feel anything. You didn't feel like you had any issues. So you wouldn't have thought that you would have any concerns about this. So,
No,
um,
we'd been to Moab and done not just hikes, but we did the hard hikes. The when we're passing people and smiling because they can't do the hike. There's a place in Moab, it's called Slick Rock, and it was my dream always to go ride a mountain bike there. And I rented a bike and went and rode bikes there. It was great. We were doing all kinds of things, and I felt like I was on track to be in shape and reach that dream retirement body, so so to speak.
right.
I was I was working on it, and so I felt great. And all the symptoms they went over in the meeting. Are you feeling this, this, and this? I'm like, no, I feel fine.
Yeah. And so the conventional wisdom or the conventional reaction, I guess, would be like somebody who is disciplined for decades, put away in their 401k, and they finally reach retirement, early retirement at 56. And now you're just like, oh man, what terrible timing this is. But you kind of frame it differently.
Yeah, I don't want to sugarcoat things and make it seem like I'm into toxic positivity. Someone gave me that term not too long ago. I
Right.
mean, there was a lot of stress, both internal and emotional, and all those kinds of things. And same thing with through the cancer experience. I think, especially men, we hold a lot inside because we want to be the strong person and not overstress our family and all that kind of stuff. And I had a bypass surgery, and bypass surgery is a serious thing. But in my mind, I was like, well, people go through these surgeries all the time, and it's not that big of a. It's a big deal, but overall, they come out of them and they're okay. There's a second part to the story that I get through the bypass surgery. I had quintuple bypass surgery, so five. And then I'm doing the cardiac rehab. You go and work out at the facility there at the hospital, hooked up to monitors and everything, and you go to uh, wellness courses where they teach you how to cook and stuff. It's really great. But I'm doing that, and I'm running on the treadmill there. Kind of a repeat experience. I'm on the treadmill. I've built up to running, and I look and I see them looking at the monitor, and then they're looking up at me, and they're looking at the monitor and looking up at me, and the next thing you know, there's three people at the treadmill, and they tell me to stop. That I was having an incident and I needed to stop, and they'd called the emergency room, and I needed to go to the emergency room. Again, I am feeling fine. I'd set a goal in my head to run a 10K, and I get stopped. And I learned after that that my bypass surgery had failed, that three of the five bypasses had gone away, and they told me that it could have happened immediately, and it only happens to about 5% of the people. I also learned there's this pattern in this that I got to be careful of, is to never get on a treadmill again. Every time I get on a treadmill, something is happening. Uh, but then, yeah, back to your original thing is, what do you do? I can't. I had that incident and then another one, and I actually have come out of the bypass worse than I was. All those symptoms that they asked me prior to my surgery or whatever, do you feel? I feel them now. I didn't feel them before, but now I have all those symptoms. I have the shortness of breath and all that kind of stuff. But back to the toxic positivity, I had a really good person tell me advice years ago. This is a person who's experienced a lot of health issues, my sister. And she said that, when you are going through something, you have two choices, and you can raise your fist at God and be angry and, say, why? And you absolutely need to do that. You need to spend time acknowledging it and feeling it and having the anger. But at some point, you got to transition over to why with your hands out, finding out what is the why. Why is this happening to me? And what can I do to turn it into a positive experience? If maybe not for me, what can I do with my story to maybe help somebody else figure out their why when the same thing happens to them? So anytime I've experienced something very negative, I'm always trying to find that open hand why. After I spend some time into the closed fist, screaming in the air, why? I think it's just so important that you transition over to the open hand part.
And the fact that you were in early retirement when you got the second diagnosis, it kind of alleviated some of the concerns you had during the first one about like, well, at least you didn't have to worry about work when you also had to worry about this, heart condition and surgery and all these other things. And at this point, you were financially independent, and you had kind of met that threshold to not have to worry about at least finances anymore now that you were going through all this. So,
Yeah, I do get
yeah,
that
that's
question from time to time. Would you have actually retired at that post-it note date had you not been laid off? And then part of my mind always wonders if I would. But had I actually been working and had this happen, I probably wouldn't have left work. I would have been worried about healthcare, all those what ifs and unknowns. And I would have not only been dealing with that, but I was in a new job, so I would have had the stress of continuing with the new role I was in, plus, fighting to stay at work because of healthcare, all those excuses people give. But we had to jump in the pool and figure it out. I had Cobra that first year, and then I've been on Obamacare, the ACA, the last 2 years, and we just had to figure it out. And there's so many people in their retirement stories that's the worst case scenario, that you retire and then you immediately have some kind of medical trauma and then you're broke. And that has become part of my why is that, hey, I'm a worst case scenario. So here's how it is working out for us. And I'm thankful that we can take care of the health thing and we can still work together to create those, memory dividends and the stuff that my wife and I are doing together and enjoying retirement. I basically lost 8 months of it after that diagnosis and everything I went through after that. But this year has been good, and we're already making plans for next year. And I am very thankful to be doing this now, sitting here in our paid for home versus sitting in a beige cubicle trapped due to debt and health.
right. Yeah, absolutely. So, after all this, you've built a YouTube channel. It's called David in Progress, and we'll have that link down in the show notes to share your experiences through going through early retirement. And I know you talk about three things. You talk about financial independence, re- early retirement, and how to live your best life now. Tell people what you're building over there and who it's for.
Well, first of all, it's been a great experience. I actually started it for people that have been laid off. Having laid off
Okay.
so many people and so many around me, the early videos, I, I had all these folks around me that had been laid off, and I thought, well, I'm going to create some videos to advise people that had been laid off how they can handle that. And so that's what the first few were. And then I gradually switched over to doing the financial independence thing. Um, you hear all these stories about people that retire and they get bored, and that goes back to I do. There's our big arguments on whether you need a purpose in retirement. People say I'm just going to I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to watch TV or whatever. That's fine. But I think, and I've got this off of someone else, I think, but you need three things: purpose, identity, and connections. And I'm a purpose-driven person. And I love being creative. And so I started making those videos, and I realized it was really filling that gap that I lost because of work. That I was in HR and I was in training before that, so I get a lot of uh, satisfaction from helping other people. And this is a way that I could help people through my story and what I learned in my financial journey. And on the other side of it, my health condition, whatever, those videos will last forever. So I was thinking of what happens 15, 20 years from now if I'm blessed with grandchildren. Maybe I'm not around anymore, and my son can show my grandchild, here's the stuff your grandpa was talking about. Here's a video on saving that I want you to watch. Get some
Yeah,
wisdom from him.
it's a
Or
great legacy piece there. Yeah, that's a good
yeah,
idea. Okay. Yeah, I'm super glad that you came on to talk to us today. And I want to say that every time I hear your story, I'm like really moved by how you've handled some of these challenges, and you've kind of just like, and I don't want to toxic positivity you, but the choices you made when it was hard. It's easy to make the right choices when things are going easy, but you've had some face some difficult things, and you've kind of persevered through some challenges. So just want to say that that's really admirable, and I'm glad that you came on to tell your story here.
well, I appreciate it. It's weird talking about yourself. It's a little uncomfortable, but I do thank you for thinking it's interesting and inviting me here to talk about it.
Great. All right. Thanks, David. And go over and check out David's channel, David in Progress, and we'll have that down in the notes. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, go check out issue 8 of The Wider Lens. There's a link down in the show notes. It goes more in depth on the conversation David and I just shared. Also, go check out David's channel, David in Progress. There's a link for that too. Zoom out, see what's possible, and I'll see you in the next one.